As I said at the outset, I'm now going to invite Duncan and then Joe to talk about their own practice and career trajectories in the context of some of the issues and themes that Robert has raised. So if I can now pass over to Duncan, a round of applause please for Duncan Smith.
I'm also going to try and manage to speak to you without the aid of the mic. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert, for a very, very stimulating talk with huge numbers of resonances. I want to do three things. First of all, I want to say something about myself, where I'm coming from. Secondly, about my organisation, Akiva, and what we try to do. And then thirdly, to respond to some of the things that Robert has been talking about. I started out as a scientist, in fact as an ecologist. And I was fascinated by the complexity of the natural world, about the non-hierarchical, networked nature of the world that we live in. I became an artist, partly because artists seem to have a more exciting life than the scientists that I was surrounded by when I was in my early 20s, but also because they seemed to be able to tackle anything that they wanted, that they were not confined to those things which were quantifiable and immediately theorizable. But for me, the things that I was and remain interested in as an artist are in a sense an extension of the things which I was and remain interested in that are dealt with more generally by scientists. I'm interested in how we think, how we see, and the whole cognitive process by which we create our sense of the world. So that's where I'm coming from. I spent much of my life teaching in universities, very much the practice of making art, how to develop as an artist. I started doing that in the late 60s, and I'm still involved to some extent in course development. Alongside all of that, I've had a practice, and back in the 1970s, because I needed somewhere to work, I set up some studios with myself and a few friends, and I still have that studio, but actually in order to preserve it and to protect it from the processes going on around us, I had to pay it far more attention than I intended at the beginning. In fact, I discovered not only that I had to spend a lot of time protecting my space, but I found I had a lot of friends who are interested in how to do that too. And as a consequence, Akiva is now quite a large organisation that art ought to be an expression of being part of a place and part of a social fabric. Akiva therefore has from the outset had two very clear objectives. First of all, to provide artists with spaces in which they could work, and secondly, to provide opportunities for those artists to engage with the places and the people around them. I'm not going to say a lot more at the moment about what artists do, but it seems to me that they do a variety of different things. Artists aren't all the same. Some art is about celebrating cultural history, some is about researching and developing cultural values, and some of it is about articulating new ways of experiencing and thinking. Why are we involved with communities? It's about providing meaning. It's about providing delight. It's about celebrating diversity, encouraging inclusion. It's also about developing self-confidence, ambition, and we're beginning to get into those areas in which, as an organization, we've had to come to terms with the surrounding systems in order to prosper. And we have to start thinking about training, employment, and such like. We also become involved in the environments in which we operate, as I said. We occupy derelict buildings. We occupy problem sites. We're interested in place, the subject of tomorrow's discussion. We're interested in beauty and significance. I'm throwing out terms here without much explanation to give you an idea of the things which I'm involved in. We are not a cultural real estate agent. There are some out there for whom the main purpose of providing studios is just that, a wall, a place in which to work. For us it is very much more than that. However, we have developed a lot of places. Since 1975, when the first studios were developed, we have developed studios, mostly in London initially, but now in Essex and further north in Stoke-on-Trent and other places. Our first buildings were little disused buildings like this little school that was round the corner from where I lived, about developing studios in Enfield in these sites, currently being used for logistics, for storage and for moving lorries and stuff around the place. That trajectory is from fitting ourselves into the interstices of the city, the places that were of no current evident use. Doing so with whatever support we could find. We are not funded to exist, we exist on our wits. We take advantage of anyone who's prepared to support us. But initially it was relatively easy to find affordable space in the city. It has become so difficult that we now find that we are approached by planners who see that there is a real problem about the squeezing out of creativity from the city. This project is funded by the Mayor of London, actually the previous one. And the idea here is that we will create studios in these huge sheds, while the entire area round about is rebuilt for residences. Enormous project, 10,000 homes, 3,000 jobs. But the idea, dreamt up by architects who understand the importance of places where people can be creative, and supported by the mayor, on the advice obviously of planners who understand these things, is that actually we should be placed even before the beginning of the development of this residential area, because it is understood that what we could bring to that is some creativity, some life, some action. And that is because of the conviction that around artists accrete the creative cultural industries. And that therefore by the time the homes develop, there will in Enfield be a spirit of entrepreneurialism. In addition to studios, I have to return to what we do for communities. So very quickly, We get involved in education and training. We work with the statutory sector, we work with the voluntary sector, we work with community groups. Our remit covers art and health, well-being these days, or whatever the current terms are, regeneration and the rest. The primary motivation for the development of this organisation was a place for me to work, and then a place for my mates to work. And what we were doing was not being part of an industry. In fact, the whole idea of industries was anathema. When the terms were first invented, we cringed at what was happening to us, that we were being seen as part of, even if at the centre of, this industrial process based upon the structures, ideologies and attitudes of the world in which we lived, and in which we did indeed feel very much on the margins. As a scientist, there are two ways of operating. One, you can do normal science, you can just carry on doing the stuff that other scientists do and make a decent living. And the other is to challenge the whole way in which you think about the nature of the world. And the same is true within the arts. There are lots of people who just do stuff based on existing aesthetic, formal, and marketing established principles, views, and attitudes. Or you can actually, as an artist, feel that what you're doing is trying to see the world differently, trying to see beyond the limitations of those ideas that you have been brought up, surrounded by. It seems to me that the world can be a very different place from the one that we're in. And it is part of my job to try to imagine that. So the art that matters is a radical process. It is not at the heart of an industry. Secondly, it is not, as Robert said, an individualistic expression of personal genius, although some kind of intelligence and some kind of perspective on the rest of the world is required. One of the things that Activa does, not being just a cultural real estate agent, is to provide places where artists, creative people can get together. People take on studios where it's not just because they need a space, but because by doing so, they are with other people who share their particular perspective on the world, who share our madness, is one way I sometimes put it. Thirdly, I want to refer to what you're saying about our relationship to the creative industries. Because we live in a world that uses these terms and that is funded according to the kinds of ideas that Robert was talking about. So sometimes we refer to ourselves as the Research and Development Department of the Creative and Cultural Industries. And they go, oh yes, I understand what that means. The R&D department, it loses money, but everybody else benefits as a result. So we do have to use the vocabulary of the people who occasionally are able to support us. In relation to gentrification, that example that I gave you of Meridian Water maybe is an indication of where we could get with the right kind of vision from planners. We don't just have to be the people that move into the places that are falling apart and for which there is no further use. We can perhaps be there at the very beginning, and that is one example of several which we're pursuing right now. We can be there at the beginning of the development of a new community and perhaps bring to it some of the attitudes and values that I've been talking about. Thank you.